over its body other than the face itself.
There are, in fact, 4 different types of, what we think of as Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Very wide, pronounced nose. There was also a very ominous odor.
Phase 1 is to identify opportunities. I walked into a small clearing in less than 10-15 feet away from this enormous creature, and it scared the living hell out of me. Phase 2 is conducting investigations both of witnesses and locations. The size of the thing, it was 4 or 5 feet across the shoulders. Phase 3 is profiling research areas, what's there, how they move, feeding, things like that. About 8 feet tall, I guessed around 800 pounds. It was massive. I had no idea that anything like that existed. Phase 4 is create an intercept plan. I decided to shoot in the air to see if maybe it would scare it off. Phase 5 is the intercept and resolve the issue phase. It didn't do anything, didn't react, and then I heard a noise from my right rear, and from out behind some brush come another one, walked over by the first one. That's when I decided to do what the dog did. I took off running. Welcome to Witness of the Unknown. Hello everyone, I'm speaking with Tom today. Tom, how are you, my friend?
I'm fine. How are you, Will?
I'm good. Let's go back to when you first got some interest in the subject, and then kind of, tell us what led you to getting interested in the subject, and then we'll go from there as far as what you have experienced yourself.
Okay. As I mentioned to you earlier, I read a magazine article about Bigfoot, and it was basically about an encounter that happened in Northern California back in the early 60s, where a logging crew had found footprints after being off for the weekend, and they'd noticed also some oil drums moved around and reported it to the local newspaper, and it hit probably the AP, UPI. And this was an article in a magazine. I don't know if it was Argosy, but it was a men's magazine, and that's where I first got interested in the subject. After that, of course, I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film and got more interested in it because there was actually a living, breathing creature that had been filmed. So I started picking up any of the books I could find, which mainly in those days were small pocketbook paperbacks. And this is way before the internet or anything like that, so you'd see things on TV like In Search Of, and TV series with any mention of Bigfoot I was always interested in, always looking in the TV guide. And for a while there, they were on quite often, and then it sort of dried up for a while.
Yeah, there wasn't a great deal out there. Yeah, there wasn't.
No, this is before internet. I mean, you had to go to the library and look up things, and there was even that was limited. So that's how I got interested in the subject. And then my brother, who actually had this encounter, he's 13 years younger than I am, but he also had the same interest. So he knew about Bigfoot. I knew about Bigfoot. So when he related this incident to me, it wasn't a surprise. It was just a location that was a surprise to me.
Well, tell me what happened with that situation.
Well, I'm trying to remember exactly. It was late September, early October 1984. I got a call from my brother one evening after I was home from work, and he said, guess what I saw earlier this week? And I thought, well, maybe he's on vacation. He was up in the Sierras or something. I said, I have no idea what. He said, a Bigfoot. You've got to be crazy. Where? He said, Simi Valley. And I said, oh, come on. So he related this story to me. This was probably Wednesday of this week, of that week. On Monday, after he had gotten home from work, he and some friends were hanging out, and one of his friends related this story that happened to a guy that he didn't know on Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. He was coming back from playing with his four-wheeler and had his son on the back of the four-wheeler and taking it home. And as they were riding it home, his son poked him on the back and said, "What's that?" He said, "Where? Look to your right." And there was this hair-covered bipedal creature about 30 yards away, paralleling them, running as fast as they were going. So he hit the gas and took off. They went over a little embankment and crashed the four-wheeler. He picked up his son and ran home. Later, the next day, he went back and retrieved the four-wheeler. And so my brother said, "Oh, that sounds like a Bigfoot. Can it be?" So they went over to the guy's house that afternoon and talked to him. And they decided that they were going to go out, him and a couple of his friends, that evening over to the field and see what they could find. Now, this field, I'm looking at a map of Simi Valley on the internet. Thank God for that. It really shows you some streets and locations. There's a place north of Simi Valley called the Mar Ranch Open Space, and it was just to the west of that. And there's nothing up there. If you go onto the internet, Will, and put in Presidio Drive, it'll show you a street that's got homes on one side and rolling hills and barren land on the other. Now, when we went out there, that field had weeds. Of course, in the fall, they were all dried up, but they were 2 to 3 feet tall. And I was told that that was oil company land, but I never saw any oil derricks or explorations or whatever. But there were plenty of dirt roads and trails back up there in the hills. So anyways, he went home, got his friends together. My dad even went out with them, and they went out there about 9 o'clock at night and started roaming the fields, and nothing. There was rabbits, there were crickets, there were all kinds of bugs making noises and whatever, but they didn't see anything at all. So they called it a night about 10:30 and went home and decided they would go back out the next night and see what they could find. So on Tuesday night, they went back out there. Again, my dad didn't go with them this time. It was about, again, 9 o'clock at night, and they started roaming the field, and they had flashlights with them, but that was all. They're trying to be quiet and whisper between them and whatever, but they were probably 30, 40 yards apart. And suddenly at the back of this one location, there was a dirt road that paralleled the main street, and it was a little bit up on the hillside. So one of them poked their flashlight up there, and sure enough, they thought they saw something duck behind this big boulder. And every time they put the flashlights down, this thing would come out, and they put the flashlights, it would duck back over behind the boulder. So all of them put their flashlights up there, and sure enough, they saw a head sticking out and an arm, just like the typical tree peeking, and it was hair covered. And after a while, it didn't move. They just kept peeking out and going. They decided to get the heck out of there. So they went back the next day, which would be Wednesday morning, and my brother measured the rock, and the rock was like 10 feet tall, and this thing was like 3/4 of the way up there where the head was. So he figured it was anywhere between 7 and 8 feet tall. So he called me on Wednesday night and told me about it, and I said, I'd love to go out and take a look at the location. So he said, well, how about Friday? So I was in outside sales, so I took a half a day off on Friday and drove out there and parked on the street, and sure enough, it was just as he described. Across the street was this field, looked like a farmer's field. It hadn't been plowed or used in years, and there was a dirt path or a dirt road that went back up into the hills. So we walked that, and he showed me where the boulder was on the parallel road, and we walked behind the hillside, and he showed me a footprint that they had discovered when he went out there on Wednesday. Now, my brother was in college preparing to be a police officer, so he had taken criminal investigation, and they covered up the footprint with a cardboard box. And he had done what you're supposed to do. He put a tape measure there and measured it and took several pictures. So when I went out there with him, he removed the box. Now this is almost a week old, but you could sure see the imprint of a human-shaped foot with toes. And we decided at that point to follow the path. And if you've ever walk through a field, which I know you have. Anybody that walked through it leaves a path. And we followed that path directly back, and we probably walked 1.5 miles, 2 miles back there. This would be about 3:30 in the afternoon. And as we got back there, we started running into trees and what I would call reeds or bamboo, and they were crying out loud 10, 12 feet tall and thick as you can get. And as we got closer to the tree line, we heard something back there. And what the heck is that? So we kept walking, and suddenly this huge barn owl flew out of the tree towards us and scared the living daylights out of us. So at that point, we got up to where the reeds were, and we both looked at each other, and I said to him, we're at least 2 miles away from the car. What are we going to do if we find something back here? Run like hell. I was 38, he was 25, but even then, running for 2 miles with something chasing you. I said, let's get out of here. So at that point, we turned around and walked back. But I had never heard of any sightings after that. There may have been some, but I don't know of any. But that area, if you look on the map, it goes over the hills to Fillmore and Piru. Now, that's the area that just caught on fire last week and burned to Ventura. If you go past that, you get into the Grapevine area, and that goes almost all the way to Bakersfield. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing back there. I mean, there might be a couple of, dirt trails for, like I said, oil company vehicles or whatever, but there's no structures back there. There's no settlements. There's no towns. There's nothing. So I could see perfectly well, the higher they get in the elevation, the more thick the scrub oaks and pines and stuff are, that something could live back there undiscovered. And if you go east, after a while, you get up into the mountains above San Bernardino and Riverside, and there's been plenty of sightings in that area. So I don't see why something couldn't live in there. I just figured it was a rogue young Bigfoot that was curious, and that's why he was running next to the four-wheeler and probably looking for food.
Right. Do you remember the size of the footprint offhand?
It was 15 inches.
15 inches.
And it was over 5 wide. Yeah, It was a good-sized foot. So it wasn't like a kid or something was making it. And, I mean, I could see a kid back there riding a four-wheeler or a motorcycle barefoot in the summertime, but this was much larger than that. There was a little drainage ditch there. When I would say more of an irrigation ditch. It wasn't deep. It was maybe a foot deep, 1.5 feet, 2 feet wide. And it was just like anybody else that would walk over something like that, put their foot on the far side, and then keep walking. And that's where the footprint was. It was in sand, so there wasn't any vegetation smashed down. We were guessing what it was. It was a pure identified footprint.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And the behavior is interesting, running alongside the quad.
Mm-hmm. And this guy knew nothing about Bigfoot. He didn't know what he was seeing. That's what scared him. It wasn't like, it was a Bigfoot. I'm getting out of here. He didn't know what a Bigfoot was. And like I said, this was 84, so let's say 20 years after, not even 20 years after the Patterson-Gimlin film, I could see a lot of people that weren't interested in something like that would know nothing about it.
Yeah, even with the film being made, it took a long time for it to really get saturated in the public mind.
Exactly. Yep. To him, it was a monster,
Sure.
Something that he couldn't calculate what that was.
Yeah, prior to all this stuff really getting out in the public, they were localized events like that one, and that's what people thought of them as. It was very location specific and didn't really get any coverage.
Right.
Well, very interesting, Tom. Did you have any other, final thoughts or anything you wanted to?
No, the only other thing, and you can cut this off if you want, I was going to ask you, after your sighting when you were a kid, did you ever think later on that such and such happened to me before that sighting and think that could have been a Bigfoot? Sounds in the woods.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When I was about 10. Now, the first time we saw anything, I was 14. We saw footprints. Mm-hmm. And had no idea what that was. And then 2 years later, I actually had an encounter with two creatures. But backing up when I was 10 years old, or around 10, this was in about 1968. We lived a few miles away from where we moved to when I was, saw the footprints and had the encounter. So
right.
it was in the same ballpark area.
Mm-hmm.
I was out riding my bike, and we lived at the very end of this dirt road. There were only 2 other homes on this road, in a heavily forested area near the Puyallup River. And I remember our cattle, they sort of had a pattern that they would do every day, so we knew exactly where they were throughout the day, depending on the time. And
Right.
I come riding my bike up, and my mother and a couple of my 2 younger sisters were standing out there by the barn looking at the cows. Well, the cows were all up in the barn, facing out with their ears up, very intently looking at something.
Mm-hmm.
And something in the tree
Waiting
line
for something to come. Yeah.
Well, the tree line was about 150 feet away, going on memory. And it was really
Right.
thick, and there was something at the edge of the tree line, just inside of it, really thrashing the brush there. I mean, it was really violent. And it apparently it upset, because see, the cows that time of day should have been way out in one of the farthest pastures, and they were up in the
Right.
barn. And I of course, being a kid, I wanted to go see what was out there. And
Sure.
And my mom says, no, there's a bear out there. Now I had an encounter, a very close encounter with a bear out there during that time period. But when I being a kid, of course, I was pretty inquisitive, and I think the next day or so I went out there to look where this happened, or we saw this happening, and we never did see anything. But
Right.
I went out there and thought, well, my dad and family friend showed me what the bear tracks looked like, what to watch for, things like that. So I went out there and I wanted to see the bear tracks. Well, there weren't any bear tracks, and it was a pretty sandy area. There was a lot of river sand out there. Didn't see any tracks. Of course, I might not have been looking in the right place, but if it was a bear,
Yeah. Right.
Bears
Yep.
leave tracks everywhere. They're not very particular about this. So I never saw any bear tracks. In fact, after we hunted the bear, when I first had the encounter, we never saw the bear again or any sign of it out there. So looking back, I'm thinking, well, maybe it was a Sasquatch, because locals called what was being seen around there the rock quarry monster.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that same year, a kid about my age come riding up to our house in the middle of the night. Well, middle of the night, it was dark. It was probably 9:30, 10 o'clock at night.
Sure.
But as far back as we lived, and there were no streetlights or anything on a dirt road back there, so it was very unusual. I saw his light on his bicycle bobbing as he was coming up the road.
So he was going fast. Yeah.
He was, and he come pounding on the door. Just he was like he was in shock. He was just beside himself, scared.
Right.
And then he said he saw the rock quarry monster, and I guess he just took off and headed our way. And my parents, of course, they didn't believe any of that, and that was the first thing I heard.
Sure.
Of anything unusual in the area, because I was out there in the brush all the time. Pretty much lived
Yep.
out in the forest. So,
Yep.
looking back, absolutely, I think, oh yeah, maybe that's what it was.
Sure. Well, what you mentioned about the footprints, my brother said that he didn't see this footprint until they came back. He didn't see it going up there, and they walked the same path. So whatever caught his attention, the toes or something, then they stopped and looked.
Sometimes it's
and
just
that's
a
when
matter.
he saw the footprint.
Yeah, it's a matter of angle and lighting.
Sure. Yep. Exactly. I was going to say just the way the light hit it. Yep.
I saw a line of bear tracks up on the Klamath River a few years back, and it didn't see them going in there. I was hiking around the area, and they were fresh tracks, big tracks, probably a big 400-pound bear, and it was just a matter of the angle. I happened to be coming from a different angle, coming back upstream, and I saw this line of tracks, and I thought, wow, that's very interesting.
Right. Well, the only other one that I ask you that because the only other incident and I never saw anything. It was just peculiar. When I was in college, this would be 1969, 2 other friends of mine and I went up through the gold rush country of California, and we stopped a night in Placerville, out in some campground, whatever, and we always parked someplace away from everybody else. And this was in the fall, so the tourists and stuff had all gone anyways. And we stayed there for a day, and we traveled up there in a Ford van, and we slept in the back. We had sleeping bags and just slept in the back. So we went swimming the next day and came back to the van, and on the side where the door opens up, there was a huge, I don't know how to describe it, looked like a watermark that covered both doors almost to the top of the van to the bottom. Now, we were probably 10, 15 feet from this bank that was as tall as the van, and there was no mark that it was a water balloon. There was actually no water down at the bottom of the doors. I mean, it could have been. We figured it could have been probably done the night before, but it's going to be sound part of, sort of crude. But I always thought, could that be a Bigfoot up there taking a leak?
Well,
spraying
you
on
never
the van.
know. I mean...
Yeah, you never know. But I mean, it was just curious that there was this big watermark covering both doors, and no sign of what that had been. And I mean, we got out and saw the van every single day while we were traveling up there for a week. So I mean, we would have noticed it just like we did the first time we saw it. You know.
It sort of brings the mental image, you know, the Jack's Lynx commercials when they first started putting those out.
Exactly.
And they put the Bigfoot's hand, he's sleeping, put it in a pan of warm water.
Yeah, right.
And it sprays all over the guy doing it.
Exactly. And I couldn't figure out I mean, it couldn't have been anything else. You know, nothing else could reach that high.
Right. Well, I mean, and you know, the thing is, you never know. You don't know.
Yeah, I know. It could have been done. It could have been done while we were swimming, and it was hot enough. It would have, you know, anything that was on the ground could have evaporated, but and it just left a stain. You know, I mean, a urine stain would cause a stain.
Yeah, there are
not
cases
just water.
Where,
you know,
there are cases where I know these things have marked territory. And, and especially encroaching on places. I'm dealing with some individuals right now and in different locations around the country, and I get this a lot, actually. You know, listeners, if they're curious, know that I actually have people contact me wanting to get rid of these things because they're encroaching, getting too close to their homes. One of the ways, my contacts who deal with this have told me is to go out and mark your territory. You know, and urinating around their properties is one of the things.
And you'll upset them because they smell it.
And it's not out of the question.
You're sort of claiming their territory, yeah.
Well, you're sort of reclaiming your own territory. So it's theoretically
But I mean,
possible.
they think it's their territory, yeah.
Right, so theoretically, I mean, and animals, lots of animals do this. And in
Sure.
that exact way, they urinate in places making a claim for their territory. If you were to encroach on their territory, and an individual's particularly territorial, it's conceivable that it did urinate on the van to claim the territory. I mean, of course, it's an unknown. We're speculating, but
of course.
It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, there's always, you know, if you don't bring these things up, I mean, you know, once you do, you start, like I asked you before about prior experiences. All of a sudden, you know, I've heard that story before. Maybe there's something to it, you know.
Well, just like when you mentioned about the creature running alongside the quad, I can't tell you how many times I've heard of that exact kind of behavior. It's much more prevalent than people know. And another side note, I was told by my sources that they don't like quads. I could
see that, the noise, and yeah, right.
They sometimes will exhibit a very aggressive, almost angry behavior.
Yep. Well, they didn't mention anything about, you know, noises, growls, howls, you know, coming towards them, doing anything. He was just running parallel to the quad, looking at them, you know.
Yeah, and 15-inch track was most likely an adult. Could have been a young adult. It's hard telling. But, you know, the creature in the Patterson film left a print just a little over 14 inches long, and that one appears to be an adult. So my guess is a 15-inch track was probably an adult. Yeah. Well, like I said on my post on Facebook, I didn't know if it was any of interest to you. You might want to just keep it for reference for sometime when you're writing or for your notes or whatever, but that's the experience we had. Well, very interesting, Tom. I certainly appreciate that. And I sure, you're welcome. Appreciate your time. Oh, no problem. Like I said, I've never told this to anybody. We've always talked about it when we get together, family-wise, once in a while. But as far as, you know, sitting down and talking to someone about it, I've never done that before. So And that's the case with the vast majority of people out there that have had experiences. You know, they either keep it to themselves, it's a family or friends type thing, even my own. Until I met John Green and Renee DeHenden, I kept it very quiet amongst my close friends who had seen some of the evidence themselves, and we weren't about to talk about it outside.
Yeah. Well, I'm not ashamed to talk about it. I'm not afraid of being ridiculed, because especially nowadays,
Sure.
you know, at least if you say Bigfoot or Sasquatch, 90% of people would know what you're talking about, even if they don't believe it or whatever. But even in those days, there just wasn't anybody that was interested.
Exactly. That was my own case, too. It wasn't that I wouldn't have talked about it, but, until I met those guys, there wasn't anybody that wanted to hear it.
Right.
All right, Tom. Well, listen, thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for calling.
I'll be airing this show today, so I'll send you a copy.
Great. Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, my friend.
You're welcome.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, for joining me this week. Be sure to tune in again next week as we explore another account from a witness of the unknown.